on Sunday mornings. Many times after the service, and I'm standing at the side door, as you leave the sanctuary, many of you give me some feedback and comments, and many times it's just godly wisdom. It's just godly wisdom. And I appreciate that. I benefit tremendously from that kind of wise counsel, and that happened last Sunday. You know, last Sunday I was preaching and talking about how God completes us, and He's the only one that can complete us. And I used as an illustration the movie Jerry Maguire, and I talked about Tom Cruise and how Tom Cruise just oozes, Tom Cruise. I was given a piece of, again, wise counsel, deeply godly wisdom, very theological. One of our members said as she was exiting the sanctuary, she said, "Nelson, the next time that you want to talk about a real leading man, put Tom Cruise on the shelf and bring out Matthew McConaughey." So I appreciate deeply theological insights like that, and I will certainly alter my position going forward. Well, this morning we are in the first Sunday of Advent, and for the month of December, we're going to think about on Sunday mornings the various kind of themes of Advent. And so this morning, we're going to think about the theme of hope. Of hope. That is what is represented in the first Sunday of Advent. And I'm going to just use one verse from the 11th chapter of the book of Isaiah. But just to kind of set a little context so we can see that this is a real verse, in fact, the entire chapter of hope. Israel has been laid waste and has been defeated by the Assyrians. And in Isaiah chapter 10, God then pronounces judgment upon Assyria for what they had done to Israel, and that they in turn would be defeated themselves. But as far as the folks in Israel went, this was a hopeless season for them. They were now in exile. Their homeland had been occupied by a foreign power. And they really, because of their defeat, had no hope for what might be in the future. And it is in that context, it is in that season and setting that the prophet Isaiah rises up and speaks to them about a day that will come and a ruler that will come. And from the Christian perspective, we look at Isaiah chapter 11 as being one of those messianic prophecies. And so the way in which that chapter begins is with this statement: a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, and from his roots a branch will bear fruit. Now, again, from the Christian perspective, we believe that what the prophet is talking about in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1 is Jesus, is the Messiah. And so he is basically telling the Israelites, there is a day, there is a ruler that will come, and though you may be cut down now, though all may seem to have been laid waste now, there's a shoot getting ready to spring from the stump. So I want to invite you and I to think about hope this morning and the power of hope. And I want to begin by reminding us of what hope is not. Because so many times you and I use that word, right? We use the word hope a lot in our conversations with one another. And in the ways in which we use it, it does not necessarily connect with what hope means in Scripture. So let's eliminate, right here from the beginning, some common misunderstandings of hope, and just think for a moment about what hope is not. Hope is not wishful thinking, biblically speaking. Hope is not saying, it would be nice if. You know, I'm a Highlander. I graduated from Radford University, and I would absolutely love one day. It would be nice if Radford University would have a football program. And if they did have a football program, it would be wonderful if they would beat Clemson.
Amen.
Now, my life isn't going to rise and fall upon that. That is, it would be nice if. But biblically speaking, that's not what hope is about. Hope is not just simply saying, you know, it would be nice if. Hope, biblically speaking, is not a pipe dream. Hope, biblically speaking, is not a remote possibility. But those are ways in which you and I use the word. That is often what we mean in conversation when we use the term hope. So what I want us to do this morning is to get grounded in the biblical, scriptural, messianic definition, Advent definition of hope. And there's a word in the Bible that is translated in the English as hope, and it is the word elpis. And it literally means a confident expectation. A confident expectation. So the biblical Christian hope is not wishful thinking, it's not it would be nice if, it's not a pipe dream, it's not a remote possibility, but it is a confident expectation. And the reason that it is a confident expectation is that whenever the word hope is used, whenever that word is used, especially in the New Testament, it is used in the context that that expectation is rooted and grounded in the character and promises of God. That is what makes biblical Christian Advent hope a confident expectation and far removed from and different than the way you and I might often use the word hope in everyday conversation. According to the New Testament, this hope, this elpis that you and I have grounded in God is referred to in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 as a good hope. The Apostle Paul there refers to hope in the fact that there is for us an eternity. We have a confident expectation that there is life beyond this life. That's a good hope. Titus 2:13 calls it a blessed hope. And the writer there is referring to the hope that you and I have that Christ will return. Christ is going to come again. And that is a blessed hope. 1 Peter 1:3 refers to elpis as a living hope. And that hope means the completedness, the wholeness, the salvation that you and I have in and through Jesus Christ. And then finally, the writer of Hebrews refers to hope as the better hope. And there the writer is talking about the new covenant that you and I have, the reconciliation, the relationship that you and I have with God in Christ, that new covenant that exceeds all others that have gone before it. And so that's what this hope means. It refers to all of those blessings, all of those expectations, all of those desires that we have from God through Christ that you and I can confidently expect. But this morning I want us to look at the imagery that the writer Isaiah uses when he writes about, when he talks about this confident expectation, this hope, there in chapter 11, verse 1. Because he uses the imagery of a stump. and a stump that is getting ready to produce a sprout. And from that sprout is going to come a branch, and that branch represents the confident expectation of Messiah, of Christ. And when you and I think about that imagery, when we think about a stump, we think about that which has been cut out, right? That which once was has now been eliminated, has been cut down. I mean, that's what a stump reminds us of, that there was once a mighty tree, and that mighty tree is gone, and now all we have left is this kind of small remnant of what was. And that was certainly Israel's case then. But I want us to think about that imagery of that stump and be reminded of maybe what might be a kind of a working definition of hope for us this morning. It's a hope that I heard described by a preacher many years ago, so I'm going to borrow his line this morning. And that is that hope is when we're down to nothing, God is up to something. When we're down to nothing, God is up to something. And that's what's represented by that stump and that shoot and then that branch that is going to come. Though it may seem down to nothing, God is up to something in the life of Israel then, in the life of you and me today, and in the future. And so with that as kind of a working definition, that when we're down to nothing, God is up to something, I want to say two things about hope this morning, about Elpis, about that confident expectation that you and I can have, because again, it's rooted in God's character and in His promise. And I'm going to borrow directly from the imagery that Isaiah gives us here. And the first thing that we need to be reminded of about hope is that hope is often discovered in the hard places and seasons of life. That's kind of what that stump reminds me of. It reminds me of what had been cut down, and now what was left, what remained. And sometimes you and I find ourselves in the stump seasons of life. In the hard moments and in the hard places. But it's in those seasons and in those places that hope is discovered at its best and deepest sense. When you and I think about the Christmas story, when we think about all that goes on there in those opening chapters of Matthew and Luke, there were a lot of people in those two gospel records that, man, they're in the stump places of life. Think about Joseph, whose fiancée was pregnant, and yet everything in first century Judaism would say, game over, right? No more engagement, no marriage, you put her away and move on. He's in a stump season of life. And then we think about Mary herself, a teenage, soon-to-be mother, who is having, I can not even imagine this, who is having to explain to her family and friends, yes, I'm with child, but by the way, Dad is God. I just doubt that really went over in a convincing way back in Mary's day. She's in a stump season of life. She's in a hard place in life. We can think about the shepherds. And there's nobody lower on the social ladder in first century Judaism than shepherds. If you wanted to be a nobody in Jewish society, go be a shepherd. That's who you were. That was your status. So the shepherds aren't just in a hard season of life. They just have a hard life. They're not in a stump moment. They are stumps themselves. And yet it is to those very folk that the angelic host appears to announce what God is up to. You see, when we're down to nothing, God is up to something. And then, of course, there's Bethlehem. Herod's all upset. And so he's going around ordering the slaughter of all male infants. Bethlehem is in a stump season. And then there are the Magi who come and being warned in a dream after finding the Christ child to go home a different route. And I don't know about you, but if I'd been one of the Magi or one of their assistants, knowing that Herod is on the move and Herod is all angry and upset, I would have been constantly looking over my shoulder wondering if he or one of his henchmen was on my heels. They're in a stump season, moment, hard place of life. And so the whole Christmas story is not about people in the best of times. The whole Christmas story is about human beings facing some hard, difficult times and seasons in their life, but yet hope oozes throughout the nativity. When we're down to nothing, God is up to something. When we're in a stump moment and season of life, there's a shoot that's about to sprout. Rear Admiral Bill McRaven was delivering a commencement speech some years ago at the University of Texas. And he said all the kind of typical, normal things that a commencement speaker would say. And he talked about, hard work and dedication and commitment and, failing but kind of getting up again and all of those kinds of things. But all of that speech was leading up to one main singular point that he wanted those graduates to be reminded of, to be made aware of. And so he tells the story about being in training as a Navy SEAL. And you and I have probably seen enough about SEAL training on cable television. We already kind of have a little bit of a working idea of what that might be like. But he talked about week 9 of Navy SEAL training with his class, with his particular class. And he said that the Navy SEAL candidates called week 9 Hell Week, because that was just the basic description of what they were going through. And he said they were deprived of sleep, and that the officers in charge of the SEAL training did everything they possibly could that week to break the men psychologically and physically. And so he said on Wednesday of that 9th week, his SEAL class was sent to a place called the Mud Flats. The Mud Flats is a real place. It's between San Diego and Tijuana. And he said the mud flats were out in the middle of nowhere, in kind of a desert-type environment, but it was a swamp out there. And he said once you kind of waded into the little mud, it would just cling to you. It would just kind of suck you down into it. And so he said that his class was made to wade out on that Wednesday into the mud flats neck deep. They're not going to sleep. They're not going to eat. And he said the wind whipped across that flat land like nobody's business, and the mud was cold. And he said the deal was this, that the officers offered the Navy SEAL class. They said, if 5 of you will give up at some point during this mud flats experience, then everybody can get out of the mud and we can all go back to base. We just need 5. And this little experience is over. They were going to be in the mud for 15 hours. 15 hours. He said it got to be hour 7, and he said you were so cold that your body was just physically trembling trying to produce body heat. That your teeth were literally chattering. And he said he could begin to look around and he could see the facial expressions on some of the men that were in that SEAL class, and he knew that some were so close to being one of those 5 that would say, you know what, I'm done here. And they were constantly being reminded by the officers of the deal. 5 give up, we can go home. 5 give up, we can go home. And he said to the graduates of the University of Texas in that commencement speech that something happened in hour 7 on that Wednesday of the 9th week of his SEAL training that he never, ever forgot and stuck with him for the rest of his naval career. He said, because in that hour, at that moment, he said there was a guy behind him that began to sing. He said, now, it was pretty off-key. But he said, this guy began to sing. And he said, a few seconds went by, and then a second and a third man joined the other guy, and they started to sing. And the trio became a quartet, and the quartet then became 8, 12, 15, and next thing you know, all of the class was singing, neck deep, in bone-chilling mud, in the 8th hour of a 15-hour experience. And so he looked out across the University of Texas graduating class, and he said, never ever forget this, and I have not myself. He said, that one voice singing in the darkness, singing when you're neck deep in mud, underscored for him and reminded him of the power of hope. It is Elpis. It is this confident expectation that when you and I are in those hard, stump seasons and places of life, we can sing in the mud. Because of the character and the promise of God in Christ. Hope is not only discovered in the hard seasons and places of life, but secondly, and in conclusion, hope is developed in the often hidden resources of God. The life that is giving, the element of the stump that is giving it life is the roots. It's what's not seen. It's what's below ground. It's what's out of eyesight. And you know what? The Bible tells us that really is the nature of hope. It is not what is seen, but what's unseen. It's not what is visible, but what is invisible. And so we hope in that which is unseen, those hidden resources of God. And so the Israelites, back here in Isaiah chapter 11, they didn't see a ruler on the horizon, but they knew one was promised. They didn't see hope in the circumstances that were around them that they could feel and touch and sense, but they knew that a new day was coming. It was hidden from them, but they had vested themselves in the fact that when they were down to nothing, God was up to something. That's hope. I conclude with this illustration. In 1982, the premier of the Soviet Union was Leonid Brezhnev. And for all of my growing up, he was the face of the Soviet Union, Russia. And so whenever I look at the newspaper or see TV news, Brezhnev was always on there, representing and being the persona of Russia, the Russian Empire. He dies. And so there is this huge state funeral, as one can only imagine as what happened in the Soviet Union and kind of the height of its power. President Ronald Reagan cannot attend, and so he sends the Vice President, George Bush, to go and to represent the administration of the United States at Brezhnev's funeral. The Vice President, later President, has told this story numerous times because of its impact. He described the state funeral in great detail. And amongst those that were in the funeral procession was Brezhnev's widow, Victoria. But he said, unlike in a situation as may have happened in the United States, that the head of state had passed away, Victoria Brezhnev was put almost at the back end of the funeral procession. Instead, the procession, as it made its way through the streets of Moscow and into the Kremlin, that those that were closest to and following Brezhnev's casket were all of the heads of state from the Eastern Bloc countries of the Soviet Union, followed by military dignitaries, military bands. His medals were put on pillows and paraded as part of the procession, and Victoria didn't even perceive those. In fact, Soviet officials only gave Victoria one opportunity to do anything at her husband, of 54 years, at her husband's funeral. But President Bush said, in recollection, it was the most powerful event he had ever witnessed. And he said, here was this huge ceremony in the Kremlin, being broadcast live on state television across Russia. And after the speeches and the